And he says, and I think this is amazing, that we can raise our hands and ask him questions mid-lecture. Now, who does that? I mean, who does that? That's just wonderful. And so if something piques your interest, he's a teacher at heart. How many young archaeologists do you think you have trained?
Not kept track.
He hasn't kept track. But I know many of my colleagues who went to his projects and loved it. And I have to say that when I was in seminary, archaeology was my favorite class ever because it was something different. It was new concepts, new ideas, and there is just so much to learn. I also was talking to his wife, Carmen, who is here, and we welcome Carmen along with Dr. Doug Clark. And she said they took their family to Jordan, and they were all just amazed that everyone they met already knew Dr. Clark because he's been there so many times. He has an apartment right there. He's setting up, this is so cool, he is setting up a museum so the Jordanian people can see what they have discovered. And he's serving the Jordanian people at this point with the knowledge of what they have found and what it means and when people were using it and that type of thing. It's just lovely. So he is an Old Testament scholar, an archaeologist. He works at the Center for Near Eastern Archaeology at La Sierra University. Director, and he also has been working at the Mattabah Plains project, and I always heard about Tel Heshbon. But now they've kind of moved away from Tel Heshbon. He also trained under Siegfried Horn, if any of you are familiar with that name, who was the original Adventist archaeologist. Okay, so all these wonderful things. But I think what I love about this man, he came and presented at our church in Sequim, is he takes very complex ideas and just simplifies them down where we can understand it. And that's just a treat, to have our minds expanded, but in a way that doesn't make us feel stupid. And that's what we're looking forward to. And we're all going to just learn an amazing amount tonight and then all day tomorrow. And if perchance you're only here tonight and you're not coming back tomorrow, we want you to sign a card because we have some other speakers coming. We have Dr. Joseph Skye, who is a cardiologist and is a certified Blue Zone speaker and is going to talk about heart health. He's coming in August, which is a hard time for people to come out, but he's coming because their family always vacations up here in August, and that's what works for him. But if you give us your name and address and email, and we will let you know when he's coming. And that will also be an amazing set of lectures that we are looking forward to. All right, let's just pray, and then we will sit at this man's feet and learn an amazing amount. Thank you, Father, you are eternal, and you knew each of the people who lived in the houses that Dr. Clark and his teams have found and used the artifacts. And it just blows my mind that you have always been, and you are still personal and with us tonight. And I pray that as we listen, will listen with really open minds and hearts. And you can impress upon us what you want us to learn and take from this place. Thank you that you are here. And thank you that we have this opportunity to learn again tonight. I ask these things in the name of Jesus. Amen.
Am I wired? How are we doing? Testing. Are we good? You know, one thing I want to adjust, Pastor Collette, in what you said, is that what I try to do is simplify things so that I can understand them. So we're all in this together, okay? Thank you. And thank you for the nice introduction. I was privileged, and Jim, did you work at the first seasons at Hispan?
I never got to go.
You did not get to go, but you worked with the material.
I always wanted to.
Yeah, okay. So Siegfried Horn was my mentor, and he is the father of Adventist archaeology. And he was a member of a number of people, he was a member of a large group of people who were basically religion, primarily Old Testament teachers, professors, who got seriously involved in archaeology in the 60s and 70s. And the Heshban or Heshbon excavations began in 1968 and ran until 76. And then that sprang into a number of projects, and I'll show you some of them on the screen here in a minute, that we called the Madaba Plains Project. So you mentioned the Madaba Plains Project. That is kind of the umbrella. Heshbon was kind of brought in after the fact, but it really was the parent. It was the starting place. So I actually started in 1973. That was the first summer I went to Jordan, the first summer I excavated, and the summer that I discovered that I could not read the Bible the same way ever again. Because of being there, because of experiencing not just the land, not just the artifacts, not just the excavation, but experiencing the culture, the ethos of the Middle East. All of a sudden, I have new eyes with which to view the biblical records. And so in many ways, that is maybe one of the biggest lessons certainly that I learned, and maybe that the rest of us can learn too. But let me ask you, how many of you have traveled at one time or another to some part of the Middle East? Okay? Which countries? Israel? Other countries not? Oh, just that one, okay? What countries?
Israel also.
Israel also?
Israel and Jordan.
And Jordan? Thank you for including us. You know, we started in Jordan because Siegfried Horn asked these friends of his that I was just describing, says, what would you recommend as a place to excavate in the Middle East that would not only carry the sorts of scientifically maturing processes that we're developing, but also biblical connections? Where would you go? And on all of their lists, there were 4 or 5 of these people, big names, and on all of their lists was Heshbon. And so he decided we need to go there, and it was in Jordan. It was easier to excavate in Jordan. In many ways it still is, but it's getting more challenging because of regulations that keep changing, and we try to keep up and adjust. But in any case, Jordan became our home. And what you see on the screen with the logos on the bottom, there's Ameri. That's the Madaba Plains Project, Ameri. And these are La Sierra. So these are going outside of the Madaba Plains Project with Hespan and so on. I'll come to those in a minute. Ataruz is an extremely interesting cultic or religious site in south central Jordan. Ramp is the Manitoba Regional Archaeological Museum project that I co-direct with another American scholar and 2 Italians and 1 Jordanian. And then there is what is called the Balua Regional Archaeological Project, BRAP, they like. It's also out of La Sierra, and it's at a site, probably the largest site in what was ancient Moab. Probably the largest site. Maybe a royal city. We'll find out. Stay tuned on that one. And then the other one on the right-hand side here is what is known as the Edom Lowland Archaeology, Regional Archaeological Project, which is down further in Jordan, further south in Jordan, actually in the valley between Jordan and Israel in the Arabah. And it's a site, actually it's many sites. There are 20 sites that have been excavated over 20-some years. All of that material excavated by the University of California, San Diego, all of that material was donated to our center. 35 tons. So it's not little artifacts. So tomorrow morning, first thing, 9:30, we will have a table here, and we're going to have little artifacts. That's not 35 tons. No, this is massive amounts. And so we have all of that material now at La Sierra, and we are right now hiring curators to take care of that material, to organize it and to systematize it. Anyway, so all of these projects are now under the umbrella of the Center for Near Eastern Archaeology. So I have a clicker here, and I've been trained on how to use it. And so correct me if I make any mistakes. And be sure to remember Pastor Colette's comment. If you have a question or comment, do it as we're going along. You may not remember it for a Q&A time, so just feel free. We'll make our way through this, and we'll try to be done by 8 o'clock. We'll aim for 8 o'clock. Somebody told me, though, that, it's Friday night. What's anybody going to do? I'm going to try. I'm going to try to aim for 8 o'clock. So for this evening, what archaeology can and can't do, emphasis on can, okay? The can't is there. And if we're responsible, and if we are ethical, and if we're paying attention to the data that's being discovered, there are some things archaeology can't do. So I'll get those out of the way quickly, and then we'll move on to what archaeology can do, because that is primarily what I assume most of you are here to hear and to hear about. So we will do that. Now I'm going to talk here with this first slide about those 3 projects, the Manitoba Plains projects. So the 50, you see the logos on the bottom, Hespan, Ameri, and Jalul. This year, the 50th anniversary volume is coming out. It's being published by a publishing house in England, but it will be available everywhere. The 50th year was actually 2017, but in any case, 2018. But in any case, the volume, these always take a little longer to do. So here they are, the 3 of them. Hespan began in 68, went through 76, started up again in 92, actually 97, and is still going. Heshbon is still going with different sorts of things going on now. One of them is community archaeology. How do you engage the village of Hespan in this project of saving their cultural heritage? That's what it's about. The Manitoba Regional Archaeological Museum is also built on the same principle. How do we develop community ownership of their heritage? We are not colonialists. We refuse to be colonialists. We are not there to control. We want to be part of a process out of which there's ownership where ownership belongs. And that's what we're doing. So that's at least that's our goal. Jalul was begun in 1992. It ran for about 20 years, currently not being excavated. But in any case, those are the 3 major ones. Okay, so that we can be proud, okay? I know pride's not a good thing, but let's be proud for just a minute, okay? And then we'll get this off the slide, okay? We'll move to the next slide. This from William Deaver, who is known and read by I suspect by some of you as one of the prominent biblical archaeologists in the world. Lives in Pennsylvania. And this is what he said about the Mataba Plains Project. It's the longest running American archaeological project in the Middle East in the history of the discipline. In the areas of breadth of conception, focused research design, continual funding, we wish there were more continual funding, but okay, training and placement of 2 generations of staff and students, and in prompt publication, the project record is unequaled. The devotion, discipline, and commitment of Adventists to such a sustained archaeological project is unique, and it alone bodes well for the future of an imperiled discipline. Thank you, Professor Deaver. Yeah, I mean, really, it is we who we celebrate. So, yes.
Is this excavation of a town or?
Many towns. I will show you some of them. So, good. But the project as a whole is 3 major sites, and this is what Professor Deaver is talking about. But I think those of you who claim Christian roots, who claim Adventist roots, can be proud that there is serious archaeology going on in our name in the Middle East that will make a difference. That, as he says, makes a difference. So we pay attention to these things, but I will get our pride part out of the way here really quickly. Okay, so here's, in answer to your question, here are the major sites located, again, all in Jordan, not far from each other, in what is called the Mataba Plains region. So you can see Hespan is at the center, Jalul to the south and a little bit east, Ameri to the north. There are other sites named there. The capital of Amman, Jordan, is up on the top of that circle. So that's what we have. Okay, so a couple of philosophical slides, okay? So when I approach ancient literature, like the Bible, I could do it for other ancient literature too. Maybe not so ancient. Maybe we could use these questions for all religious literature, for literature that has some sort of intent of being religious. So my 3 major questions when I approach a text, like I would in the Bible: what did these words mean to the people who first heard them? They were written for a live audience. They were written for these people that Pastor Collette talked about that lived in these houses. That's who these biblical writers wrote for and spoke to. So what did they mean to the people who first heard them? Notice I've used the word the people, not the person. Literature in ancient times was always community. In fact, most likely community authorship. You think about Isaiah, it's probably a group of Isaiah and his disciples. I'll use the word disciples, that's kind of a New Testament word, but his community. So I have to think about this in a different sort of way. And so when people heard, what did these words mean to the people who first heard them? 90% of Scripture was first spoken before it was written. There are dynamics in oral transmission that are not the same as written. Written is basically left brain. It's analytical, it's flat, it's black and white, it's on a page. Listening is holistic and basically engages your whole brain. That's a different kind of dynamic. So what did these words, pick Isaiah, pick Paul, pick anybody, what did these words mean to the people who first heard them? Here is where archaeology, I think, can help us the most. If we could somehow reconstruct the world of the 8th century BC, and here, as a community, nobody sat down and read the Bible on their own. No, these things were heard together in community. And if we sat down, and if we could somehow get into the mind, into the ethos, into the world of the 8th century inhabitants of Judah, we would hear Isaiah maybe quite differently than we read it today. That's what I'm saying. So, can archaeology help us get at that meaning? That's what I want to do. Okay? That's one of my primary goals. What did these words mean to the people who first heard them? What then do these words mean to people hearing or reading them today? Notice the word then. So what from that first question will help us understand how we should read them today? Let me take an example from Adventist history. In the late 19th century, lots about bicycles. And you shouldn't have them. You shouldn't ride them. So is there anything contextual that could help us understand why people in the late 19th century should not buy and ride bicycles? More than expensive, over the top expensive. So if we could get into the late 19th century, which is easier than the early 8th century BC, but if we could get into that world, then we could understand things better. I think that's where we're going with this. And then with Scripture, I have another question. These two questions, anybody could do in an academic setting, students, teachers, classes. But the third one is more of an aesthetic one. So what? If I do find out what they meant to the people who first heard them and could now understand what they mean to us, how am I affected by that? How am I changed? Does it make any difference to me as a person or as a community? So these are the questions I ask of ancient texts. And I ask that of biblical texts because of their antiquity as well. Okay, and then biblical archaeology. Got to get this definition. This will be on the quiz, okay? Nothing else is going to be on the quiz, but this definition, okay? So, biblical archaeology, the systematic, okay, wait, let's stop at that word. Indiana Jones, don't apply. This is not for you, okay? The systematic, okay? The systematic recovery, these 5 words all mean something. Recovery, analysis, interpretation, preservation, and presentation. Some of these words have actually come into my definition of biblical archaeology in the last couple of decades, like preservation and presentation. In any case, the systematic recovery, analysis, interpretation, preservation, and presentation of ancient cultural remains relating to biblical people, places, concerns, etc. So that's my definition. So those are my 2 kind of philosophical slides, okay? What do I want to find out when I read an ancient text, including the biblical text? And what is archaeology that relates to the Bible, okay? This is where I am. Okay, I have 3 or 4 potential abuses of archaeology. A couple of these you may not like. Okay, we'll talk about it. You can raise your hand. You can grab me by the hand. You could, okay, we could do all kinds of things. But let me talk about 4 potential abuses of archaeology. In other words, what archaeology can't teach us or how it cannot help us. One of them, and I see the text has gone off the screen here, which is exciting. We're on a different computer than this presentation was made on. Excavation techniques which focus only on layers. You know, these ancient tells are like cakes with layers of occupation. And you can date these things pretty carefully and pretty closely. So some people would say, let's just go to the layers that are biblical. So let's go to what we would call the Iron Age and the Roman period, the New Testament. Let's go to those periods. Anything after that, here's where it gets to be a little touchy because religion plays a role. With the conquest by Christians in the Byzantine period and the conquest by Islam in the Islamic period in the 7th century, some people would say, let's just scrape that stuff off. We don't need that. Or even if we do excavate it, we don't need to be as careful as we do with the real stuff, the biblical stuff. That's a bad thing. It's not so much a problem anymore as it used to be. I remember visiting a small museum and seeing a picture up on the wall of an excavation site, and there was a bulldozer. It's a bulldozer. And I asked the docent, what is that bulldozer doing on a sensitive archaeological site? And he said, well, the driver is really good with the lift, with the blade. He's very sensitive. He can feel the smallest little change. Pooey. That bulldozers used to be used to clear off these layers that weren't biblical. So that doesn't happen so much anymore, but it still is a potential abuse. Okay, another kind of abuse. Attempts to prove the Bible, okay? We have to talk about this one. Archaeology is not made to prove the Bible. Archaeology is extremely helpful in illustrating the Bible and in providing a kind of confirmation of the world of the Bible. But archaeology cannot prove the Bible. Archaeology may be able to identify a particular city's destruction, and that happens all the time. And you may be able to connect it with a particular time period. That happens all the time. But archaeology in no way can say anything about God and God's role in that city. Archaeology has its limits, okay? I remember giving an archaeology presentation, and I looked at the sign, Pastor Collette, to see that it wasn't there, and it wasn't. When I remember giving a series of presentations at a church far away, and we'd set up the title, we'd set up the parameters, and then I get to the church, and on the narthex wall is this big poster that says, "Clark here to show that archaeology proves the Bible." Arg, we can't do that. We just have to stay away from that notion. It can get us into all kinds of trouble. Some of you are aware of archaeological museums. I'm thinking of one, the Museum of the Bible in Washington, D.C. That tends to be a fairly strong point to prove the veracity of the Bible. That museum has been hit by lawsuit after lawsuit after lawsuit for mishandling artifacts. There's an ethical gap somewhere. In any case, I'm not going to dwell on it too long, but I just want to say that archaeology can be so helpful in a million ways, and we're going to talk about some of them, but it can't prove the Bible. It cannot prove what God did. Sometimes it cannot prove what people did. Sometimes we'll read about a discovery, and we'll say, that proves the Bible. No. It gives us some good, serious illustration, which feeds into this fabric of background of the Bible. And that is what I think is so helpful. And that's why, when I said what I did earlier, that my first trip to the Middle East, when I came back, I could not read the Bible the same way. It's that fabric, it's that undergirding historical narrative and ethos of the world of the Bible that I think archaeology really helps us with, okay? Another couple things that archaeology does not help us with. Plunder and looting. My bet is that none of you has gone over to the Middle East, those of you who've traveled to the Middle East, to plunder a site. That's my bet, okay? Am I right? Am I okay on that one? Okay. However, is it possible that we could encourage plundering and looting of sites by buying artifacts on the market? That's huge. We have a no purchase policy at La Sierra. We just do not purchase archaeological artifacts because it encourages the middle people. They may be middlemen, but there may be middle women. I don't know. They're middle people. And we know how the system works. We've followed the pots. We've followed the ceramics. We've followed them. And we know how it works. And we know how the buyers, the dealers, set up regular visits to villages and tell people, meet us this next Saturday once a month and bring what you found. Bring what you found in the cemetery. Now let me show you a picture of a cemetery. This is from Iraq. Well, this is not a cemetery. This is from Iraq. And you can see the organized lines in the lower part. Those are archaeology. Archaeologists have been at work here. You can tell. What's all the rest of this moonscape? That's looters. That happened after the U.S. invasion of Iraq in 2003. So people are looting everywhere. And they go down and they go horizontally between these holes and they find whatever they can. So we had every November, mid-November, we do an archaeology discovery weekend at La Sierra. We do it online as well as in person. And this last November, it was on Petra. And so this news came out, and it was everywhere. It was CBS, NBC, CNBC, it was Fox News, it was Popular Mechanics gets into this for some reason. I have no idea why. But in any case, it was everywhere that a new tomb with 12 individuals in it had just been discovered in Petra underneath the treasury. Now the treasury, you may remember, is the iconic placeholder. Anyway, on the Indiana Jones film, at the end of the Final Crusade. So it's the temple at the end of the crescent moon, the valley of the crescent moon, which of course isn't right. But anyway, but the treasury, and so this news thing came out, and everybody was publishing it. This new tomb had been discovered, fresh tomb, 12 new people. We now know a lot more about burials of these people, the Nabateans. Turns out that the speakers who came for our presentations for this weekend, they all work in Petra. And they all know that it was a flat-out lie. Media outlets made lots of money on this. But it simply wasn't true. It had been excavated before. It had been published, sort of. That was a bit of a problem because it wasn't published fully like it should have been. But there was nothing new about it. There were lots of burials in Petra. And so it comes out and it hits it makes exciting news. Now maybe that's okay. Maybe it's okay for people to say, oh, another good reason to go to Petra. Okay. Any reason's a good reason. You need to go to Petra sometime. But in any case, the sensational gets out of hand. Okay, so let's get away from that. Let's go to potential uses of archaeology. Okay. So we have several science and technology applications. I'm going to get to biblical stuff, okay? But I want to set this wider stage, okay? Because archaeology is not just a treasure hunt. A lot of people would like it to be, and people do come up to us and ask us, so what did you hope to find? And our response typically is, whatever is there. But that is not exciting. That does not make any headlines. And so in any case, a tremendous amount of science and technology. We can now, ancient DNA studies. I'll be talking tomorrow morning about a family of 5 people. well, it was a group of 5 people. One of them was not family, that we knew by ancient DNA studies that had died in a house that we excavated. This is part of Mr. Rogers' neighborhood. Okay, so this is a house that we excavated, and these people died there. We now can do ancient DNA, and we can know who belongs to whom. We can do a kind of tomography on ceramics, on pottery. So you take a piece of a cooking pot. A cooking pot, you'll see some pictures, I don't know if tonight or tomorrow. Anyway, and you can take a part of that cooking pot, even at the rim, and run it through this analytical process, and you can tell what was cooked in that cooking pot. You can tell whether it was meat, whether it was dairy. Does that matter anything in the Old Testament? I think so. Whether it was vegetable, you can tell. We have a master's student, he's now going into his PhD program, who came and studied our sheep bones from Tel El-Ameri. And he looked at the mandibles and at the teeth, and he used a process called strontium isotope analysis. He could tell where those sheep were born, how far they'd been transported, what they ate en route. This from strontium isotope analysis. He's coming back, now doing his PhD, and he's going to apply other kinds of isotopes and find out more about these sheep. These sheep are going to be the best known sheep in the world. So, in other words, I just wanted to say there's so much now that we can do technologically. We measure now with a GPS system, global positioning system, so that we can get an object and we can find it in the horizontal dimensions of X and Y, and we can also do it Z. So we can put this object back to within 2 centimeters of where we found it. That's the kind of technology we're working with here. Some of the technology that we record with, the LiDAR, it's down to a couple of millimeters that you can get for accuracy. So when the dentist goes in and when you need to have a crown done, and he's got that thing, that wand waving around, that's not LiDAR, but that's photography, and it's a kind of RTI. It's a reflective transparency image, and it takes hundreds of photos, and then through a computer program stitches them all together and gives you a precise look at your tooth. When that goes to the dental lab to fix your crown, that's why it comes back and it really does work well. And it's that kind of thing that we can do now in archaeology. So that's actually quite exciting, what we can do with technology. Let's look at another one, historical information. This is one of archaeology's biggest contributions. It provides historical information, people, places, chronology, the reason events happen, causes, causation. The historical information that we now have of the biblical world is unprecedented, is simply unprecedented. And it's available. A lot of it's available online and open source. So we can know that. And then there's another word here, 2 words in quotation marks, global history. Global history is a different kind of history. It's not so much concerned with geography and politics, geopolitical, or chronology. Global history attempts to step way back, maybe 30, 40,000 feet above the earth, and look at the globe and think not about a particular time in history, but about the kinds of changes that happen over time in a global look that affect all of us. So now when we do archaeology, and we explore the archaeological remains from a particular place, a particular period, we not only ask, what does this tell us about the people at the time, like my question, but what can this do to help us with today's problems? Let's take water. The Middle East is water poor. The country of Jordan is the third most water poor country in the world. So can archaeology help solve a modern problem? Can we explore ancient water systems in ways that we might actually apply them and apply lessons to the modern world? And the Heshbon project actually created a program called Rain Keep. And what it did was to repair a score or more of ancient cisterns. These are plastered cisterns in the ground that had long gone out of use and out of repair. So they replastered them, rechanneled rainwater, runoff water into them, and gave farmers today water for irrigating their crops. That's what I mean by global history. What can we learn from the past that actually can fix something today? Climate is a big one. What can we learn about the climate? I'll be talking about that more shortly. Okay, a couple more things. Textual discoveries. I'll talk more about this tomorrow afternoon when we talk about inscriptions. But there are so many inscriptions that help us in our reading of and understanding of the Bible. Let me just show you this one. This is the size of a thimble, okay? So think about this as very small. So you'll notice that the detail here is pretty good for the size of a thimble. It is what is called a bulla. It's a piece of clay that has been impressed with a stamp seal, probably a ring or a pendant, and it's been stamped into it. And this particular one we found within a couple days of beginning our excavations at Ameri way back in 1984. And it's interesting for several reasons, but primarily because of the names. I won't say much more about them. But across the top, belonging to a particular person, Milcom, which is actually the name of the Ammonite god. Milcom is light, belonging to this official with this name, who, with these three letters, that means the servant of, and then the name of the official that Milcom reported to, and that's Baal Yasha. And it turns out that he is the infamous Baalis in Jeremiah 14, who set up an assassination, a successful one, against the governor of Judea, Gedaliah, whom Nebuchadnezzar, okay, these names are all familiar, right? Okay, Nebuchadnezzar put Gedaliah over Judah as a governor, and Baalis, or Baal Yasha, is the guy who set up an assassination attempt through one Ishmael. We now know his real name. In Jeremiah, Baalis doesn't mean anything. It's an untranslatable ending. But now we know what it means, and Baal Yasha on this inscription means Baal delivers. Baal saves. Not quite the same.
Where did they find that at?
That's at our site in north central Jordan at Ameri. So that was found within a couple of inches of topsoil. It had been burned accidentally, and so that's how it was preserved. So we will talk some more about these. The Moabite stone, I'm going to say more about this tomorrow, so I won't spend more time with it here. But this has a fascinating medical missionary story behind it. And those of you with Adventist roots think medical missionary. That's kind of how we thought about ourselves and have thought about ourselves, and in some ways do today. I'm not going to stop here. I'll come back to that tomorrow. the cave 4 of the Qumran caves, the Dead Sea Scrolls. Okay? So I just show these few slides to tempt you to come tomorrow afternoon. Okay? That's all I'm doing. All right? So inscriptions, they are extremely important. Aesthetics and devotional. I have to say that in doing archaeology, in actually excavating a house, and I'll show you more about this tomorrow morning because this is going to be Mr. Rogers' neighborhood. Okay, it's a particular house that we excavated and the houses around it. And in excavating that house, it was really moving. I heard you, Colette, talk about something that was moving to you. This was moving because once we had finished excavating most of it, we noticed in what we call the bulk. It's the wall of dirt that we leave until we come back to it, so that we can keep a kind of a record of what we've been excavating as we go down. And in the bulk was the base of a large storage jar, and it was tipped on its side, and out of it was flying these carbonized wheat seeds. Carbonized because they'd been burned in a fire. And right next to that, so this had fallen and had crashed and spilled. Oh, and it was caught in the destruction. It was caught. And I should have looked for the picture of this thing, because I got a picture of it. Because here it is, and here's the base, and it's all of these black spots. It's the carbonized wheat that just flew out of this thing. And right next to it were two animal bones. They were connected, which normally doesn't happen. Bones don't stay articulated in antiquity because the dogs and other animals get at them and tear them apart. These were articulated, which means that they were hanging ready to be eaten. And these were hanging on the second story of a house that was destroyed, right next door to the house that we're going to go to see, and it's all part of Mr. Rogers' neighborhood. And that meant that these people had to flee in a hurry. They left food hanging in the pantry. And as everything crashed down, not only did those bones, and they stayed articulated, not only did those bones come, but also this container of food just spilled out into the open. You don't have to go very far to try to imagine the trauma of the family that lived in the house you have just excavated. You do not have to go far to imagine the kind of pathos and pain. That destruction left 5 people dead. I mentioned them a minute ago, that we've done ancient DNA analysis on, that we know of. I mean, certainly more people than that, but in any case. So archaeology has this capacity. Okay, a couple other things. Information about the environment. Archaeology can give us a lot of background about the biblical environment, okay? So, ancient climates. There are several ways archaeologists go about understanding ancient climates. One is to drill cores in dry lake beds. Now, why would they do that? Because annually, as the seasons change, leaves will fly in, pollen, okay? When does pollen come out? Well, it depends on the plant, but it comes out seasonally, right? And so pollen flies out over these lakes, settles on the water, ultimately settles to the bottom, and then you have tree rings. When you do this coring, you have tree rings. You have annual, measurable evidence of what existed at the time. And so if you can go back and date a particular layer, then you can say, okay, with the pollen that was in this layer, these are the plant communities that existed. This means it was getting this much rainfall. This means these sorts of animals were around. This means human beings could or could not live here. So yeah, climate and climate studies, really exciting. Ancient people and people groups, you study those sorts of things with anthropology and so on. Landscapes, there are ways to reconstruct landscapes from antiquity, and plants and animals. I mentioned a couple of those. We determined that the forest around our site at Ameri was populated by oak trees, a particular kind of oak tree. And we did so because we found the evidence that people had dug these little holes in the bedrock in order to smash acorns, and we found the bones of wild boar. Wild boar love acorns. The oak forests, though, need a cover for the young ones to come up and to be protected. And so those were all gone. Deforestation has happened too many times in lots of places in the world, and there in particular. Information about daily life. So I'm looking at a couple more minutes here. Let me say some things about daily life, and then let's think about the sorts of ways that this might help us as we then pick up the biblical text and read it. So, ancient houses. Tomorrow morning, okay, we're going to Mr. Rogers' neighborhood. That's where we'll talk about it. Ancient food. Food systems. What did people eat? And food systems is not just food, what did they eat, but how did they prepare it? It turns out then that in ancient times, people spent between 70 and 90% of their waking hours putting food on the table. Okay, I think that's more than we do, right? Am I right? Okay, you have to go to work, okay, to earn food to go to the grocery store. But how much? What percentage of time would you say you dedicate to putting food on the table? Okay, you can hold that. So it's, I would say it's less. All right. I'm just. What's that?
Driving to the store?
Yeah. Okay. That's okay. So keep track of those minutes too. We'll see how long it takes you to get to 90%. Ancient dress, we actually know a lot about ancient dress and how people dressed, and survival. I'm going to show a couple of slides that illustrate this. This is a house. We'll see it tomorrow morning, and we'll spend more time with it tomorrow. It's what is called a 4-room house because of rooms on the ground floor. It actually has more rooms than 4, but we'll talk about that tomorrow. This house we excavated. Everything in this picture we excavated, except for the blankets and so on, because they would have long ago disappeared. The reason we excavated it all is because it was entirely covered with about 6 or 7 feet of mud brick. It was the second story was made out of mud brick. And so the whole first story was preserved. Nobody had touched it until we got there.
What's on the back wall?
On the back wall, those things standing, those are what are called a pithos. It's a storage jar.
Okay.
And so this picture actually doesn't represent how many there were. There were 70. Wow. And these things are 3 feet tall. There are 70 of those in this building. This is more than just a home. It is a home, but it's probably a sheikh's home, a kind of a leader's home. And leaders in the ancient Near East, like in the Middle, and like in the modern Middle East, take care of their families. That's what they do. And so this is probably a fairly, we can't say wealthy because nobody was wealthy in 1200 BC. But in any case. Right, so there's one now. Okay, this has been restored. They all collapsed. The second story collapsed onto the first story, and everything smashed, but the pieces stayed there because the walls were still there. So all of those pieces were brought to Walla Walla University, and we filled 3 unused chemistry lab spaces, rooms. No, that's exactly right. No, and it took us years. And what we did was we would start forming the base of a jar, and you could look at the pottery and say, okay, this is a specific color. I think I can spot other pieces. And then you would go around and look at these other crates, and no, that took years. Took years. So I think that says something. I think that's about time. So let me say something about other life activities, like putting clothing on. How are you going to turn the wool on your sheep into something that is wearable? Well, you have these things up on the left. You see on the left side with a hole in it? It's called a spindle whorl. And you put a stick through the middle of it. I'm telling you too much because this is on the quiz tomorrow for 9:30. So forget that I'm saying this, all right? In any case, these were used to spin wool into yarn. And the smaller ones, you see on the right-hand side, right up near the wool, those are smaller ones with the hole in it. That would be used for flax, to make linen, to make underwear. So you have different sizes for different kinds of things. Okay, so I'm going to end here. This is a picture of one of an individual who's dressed. It's actually a Syrian, and it is. You can see in the text a bound Syrian who wears a typical costume and hairstyle. It's Canaanite. So if you want to know what the Canaanite looked like, we have a picture. Okay, it's not, it wasn't taken, just recently, but we do have some kind of image. We actually have lots of these. We have pictures in stone of royal officials, royal Judean officials, who are in subservience to a colonial king, an emperor king. And it's nice to see the Israelite. There are quite a few Israelites pictured in inscriptions, in graphic relief. Usually, though, the bad news is usually they are in trouble and they are bowing down to somebody else.
So they drew that, or?
No, this is actually in. I don't know if it's in. It's glazed tile. So this is a piece of ceramic, and then it's been decorated on the front to illustrate what a Canaanite looks like. So if you're reading in the Old Testament and you want to know what a Canaanite looks like, okay, we know now. So we have that. But lots of other people. My favorite one is the picture. It's called The Woman in the Window. And it's got some just kind of a balustrade, and then it's got some what I think you'd think of as stone, maybe a fairly sophisticated stone, and then the window, and then there's a woman pictured in there. I'm not going there. Okay. But how does one understand a woman in the window? Because the motif shows up all over the place. There is the story in Judges about Sisera. No, I've got to get to the right story here. Yes, Sisera's mother. Remember at the end of the story when Yael puts the tent peg in Sisera's head, then there's this side picture that's developed. There's a kind of a little side entry there, narrative about Sisera's mother who's standing in the window waiting for her son to come back victorious. It is so ironic, but it is a woman in a window. And so, but there are different sorts of places where women are pictured in the window. They're actually beautiful. They're spectacular, and it's part of what we have. So we actually do have some pictures. Yes.
And so, okay, was that color when you found, like it's glazed, so it hasn't
Right.
been through restoration?
Right.
That's wow.
Right.
That's amazing.
Right.
That's amazing.
Right. Now sometimes they'll be crusted over. It depends on the soil. If the soil is too much limestone, they'll get the accretions.
Don't do that. That's
Right.
insane.
Correct. And they've discovered since people.
The years
Well, since people started asking questions about color, people have asked about some of the major monuments, including those in Rome. And that, as a matter of fact, it turns out that those were, at one point, very brightly colored. So those massive, monumental lintels were actually brightly colored. So, yeah, that's this question here.
What is BCE?
Ah, good question. So BCE, some people, yeah, okay, what does BCE mean here? So BCE is before the Common Era, which means it's kind of levels the playing field. So you're not talking about the years from the birth of Jesus. You're talking about the years of common, so that anybody from other religious traditions can think about the common year. It's the same year. It means the same thing. Right. 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 It is. It is. And it's but for AD, which is Anno Domini, the year of our Lord, it's CE, Common Era. Not everybody uses it. Where I work in Jordan, people typically don't use it, and so I don't. Most of what I do is BC AD, but this is being used quite widely. Okay? Yes?
I'm curious that, how come you find so many well intact pieces from a time where I imagine resources were pretty,
Ah. It,
well, people would have picked stuff up and like reused stuff. I'm just curious, how come there's so much that got covered
right. So the question has
so
to do,
intact and didn't get excavated before already and reused?
right. The question is, why do we find such good stuff?
Yeah. Where do you find such good stuff?
Okay, I paraphrased. Okay. I wished it were true that we would find so much good stuff. But part of this depends on history. So at particular times, for instance, the late Bronze Age is from about 1550 BC or BCE to 1200. Moses, we think about Moses in this time period. That was a time in some parts of Palestine, especially the Mediterranean coast, a lot of wealth, a lot of opulence and wealth. And then you move on up into Lebanon, you've got the Phoenicians, the shippers, the traders, and so on. So you have incredibly wealthy people living in these, what are called city-states along the coast. By the time you get to Mr. Rogers' neighborhood that we'll be talking about tomorrow, it's about 1200 BC. By the time you get to 1200 BC, in the central part of Israel and Jordan, it is extremely diminished. You cannot find stuff like this unless it's imported. But it doesn't happen often, because what happened is there's a big power vacuum. And all of Palestine, well, both sides of the Jordan River, were basically, what's the word I want? They were, there was nobody in control. And so what happened is that people from nomadic traditions would come and build little settlements. People from the cities would come. People with farming background would come. And they built hundreds of little villages, which ultimately became ancient Israel and ancient Ammon, Moab, Edom. But those were poor. And then as soon as, okay, the time of the judges, if you think about poor times, think about the time of the judges, okay? Once you get to the kingdoms of David and Solomon, and then the later kings especially, then wealth is back. Now, I need to tell you that there's a problem when this happens. When everything was poor, that meant everybody in the household was as valued as anybody else. The children had a role to play. The women had roles to play, including in religion. That's in a society that is much more, I'm going to use the word inclusive, that's what it is. By the time you get to about 1000 BC, so 1200 to 1000, we're talking about pretty even-handed treatment of everybody. By the time you get to 1000 and beyond, then the market economy develops. It was a subsistence economy, so people had to survive on what they could catch, what they could grow. But then when the market economy came, so you had markets downtown, that's where men controlled the world. And women's roles diminished. And so, I mean, that's just part of the dynamics here. But I've left off your question and gone to something else. But in any case, part of it depends on the time period. When the markets were there, you had lots more wealthy, this kind of stuff. You had better furniture. You may remember reading, for instance, in the book of Amos about the inhabitants of Judah and their couches of ivory. Buying these couches of ivory, especially at the expense of the poor. That's what they were doing. That was the problem Amos had. And so these couches, they were wooden frames with ivory inlays. Those didn't come easily. And so when you have, and we have some of those inlays from Samaria. And they're nice. They're very nice. So it depends on the time. It depends on the market forces. It depends on a number of things. But
So there's still more to come then?
oh yes. Oh yes. Now my focus of attention has been professionally and in many ways personally in the time of the judges. And the reasons are a couple. One of them is my excavations at Telelomeri put me right on top of this neighborhood I'm going to talk about tomorrow. And it's from 1200 BC. And then, at the same time, I was working with another scholar, an English professor from Walla Walla. Some of you may know her, Beverly Beam, passed away a couple weeks ago. In any case, she and I, for years, team taught a class in the book of Judges. And so we were doing the reading of the Samson story while I was excavating from the same time period. We were doing the reading of the Jephthah story, which happens in Jordan. All of it in Jordan. And we were excavating at a house that could have been Jephthah's house. I mean, okay, so that, for me, that's the top of the world for me. But what that means is that that my life has been somewhat constrained, at least professionally, to the period I know the best.
Are you going to go back and do it again?
Okay. I think I've done the last excavation that I'll do. I actually will be on site in June for the excavation at Balua that our university supports, but I'll only be there for a couple of days. My museum project has taken over, so, right.
Yeah, but you know you want to be there.
Oh, how do you know that? Okay, any other questions before we close? Okay, got a couple more here. Here.
So if you found an artifact like that, what is the response of the team? A collaborative celebration?
Right,
When you
right,
find something
right.
cool?
So we did find something, it wasn't quite like this, but it was an extremely impressive jar handle. It was just a clay jar handle with a stamp in it. And the stamp, it turned out to be, was from Pharaoh Tutmosis III, that many people would associate, depending on when you date the Exodus, to the earlier date. And so one of my students, Caroline was her name, one of my students was excavating, and she held this up, and I was, I don't know, 40, 50 feet away. Is this important, Dr. Clark? So we celebrate on occasions like that. That definitely happens. But we do have to be careful. We don't harm it. We don't damage it. We have to be careful.
Exploit it like a
It's
football.
not usually, not usually so. Okay.
You go back, you go back.
He's pegged me.
You made the statement that archaeology doesn't prove the Bible, and I understand that and I agree. But you would also agree with the comment that archaeology can be consistent with, or there's another word, I'm blanking.
Well, I think the notion,
Consistent with Scripture.
right? There's a
Supportive of Scripture.
supportive. I even like the term confirming. Now, some people may say.
Confirming. Yeah.
Some people may say that's really close to proving. What's your problem here,
Yeah,
Clark?
I like that word too.
But the challenge is that there's good news with the attempted marriage we want to make of archaeology and the Bible. There's good news, and then there is,
It's not always good news.
then there's potentially good news. One has to massage that just a bit. No, there are, well, if one comes at it more openly, then one can be prepared for the fact that these archaeological findings, and there are plenty, simply don't match. And that's the case, folks. That just is the case. There's one major sort of area where that happens, and I'm going to say, okay, it's a problem, and then I'm going to tell you the solution, and you're going to say, well, that's a problem, okay? But so archaeologists have not found the kinds of evidence for the conquest in the book of Joshua, okay? So you've got sites like Heshbon, where I cut my teeth. You've got sites like Jericho, sites like Ai. You've got sites like Kadesh Barnea. Folks, I'm going to be the bearer of bad tidings. The archaeology is problematic. Heshbon, and Siegfried Horn discovered this within the first year or so of the excavations, did not exist when Sihon, king of the Amorites, is said to have lived there. It did not, it wasn't there. So, okay, I'm going to give you a solution, and you're not going to like it. The books of Joshua and Judges are dealing with the same time period, right? Joshua's conquest model and narrative is sweeping, it is quick, it's over in a blink, and it's complete. And that's the way the book of Joshua ends. All of these sites were conquered and destroyed. Archaeology does not support that. Okay, I'm going to use the word support. The book of Judges is really close to archaeology. So the archaeological work, and that's why I love the book of Judges. I know, don't read it after 8 o'clock. You don't want to read about Jephthah's daughter after 8 o'clock in the evening. So here's Judges. The archaeology we do from this time period matches incredible. I'm going to use matches, okay? Supports, whatever. We've got some language here. It is so incredibly insightful what archaeology can tell us about these sites in the book of Judges. Okay, now I told you there was another problem here, right? Okay, so what are Joshua and Judges doing right next to each other? And Judges will say, this city was occupied, continued to be. Joshua said it was destroyed. That's inter-biblical, okay? That's inter-biblical. And I think the people who study this material can give us some helpful insights. For instance, Joshua really is a celebration of quick conquest. Knock those bowling pins over. let us through. We're coming, and we're coming quickly, and we're on our way. And if you read the first part of the book of Joshua, 6 chapters dedicated to Jericho. And then I think it's a couple to Ai. No, I think it's another 3 or 4 to Ai. And then there's one chapter, the conquest to the south. Boom. Another one, the conquest in the middle. Boom. Another one, the conquest to the north. Boom. And then that's all. Joshua 13 begins something quite different from all of this. So it's a kind of a celebration of we're in the land. How did we get here? We want to tell you, we worship a God who can do it quick. And let's be happy with that. Let's celebrate it. This is one place where archaeology is not going to be the best friend for Joshua, but for Judges, yeah. Okay, that was complicated to get at that, but I think, and one of the reasons I say what I do about archaeology proving the Bible is that there are these challenges. I'm one, and maybe I am just a kind of a cup half full kind of guy. I want to say there is good news and there is potentially good news. I'm serious about that. Now, the potentially good news may take me in a direction that's new. Okay, let's discover. I'm an archaeologist. That's what we do. So, exactly. Okay, I'm sorry. Okay, I think there was 1 or 2 more questions.
It's all about faith, but every little bit helps.
You know, faith is, we believe in the inspiration of the Bible because of faith. Facts can help, but they are not the basis of faith.
I would assert that if you were able to prove everything, you could no longer call it faith.
Well, I think you'd be talking yourself out of faith, right?
Right.
Right.
And there's a
Right.
great deal of importance in
Right.
faith.
Right. And as an archaeologist, I deal with facts. As a biblical scholar, I have to do the other. So I live in this tormented world. No, I really don't. I don't, because I really believe in good news and potentially good news.
And you don't, because your site's turning up all the proof.
Please.
Doesn't it solve the problem if we were raised to say the words of the Bible are not inspired? I mean, the people that wrote them are, but they're
Right.
saying it in their own words.
Right.
So then Joshua and Judges could fit in with that
Right.
scenario.
If you look at the biblical literature carefully, you'll find a number of books and passages next to each other that have these interesting and potentially, the juxtapositions. If you read Proverbs, the world is a beautiful, organized, structured, great place. Read it along with Ecclesiastes. Not the same. Or Job. They're not the same. Read Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. A lot of consistency there, but a lot of variation. And it's because people, you're right, it's people. And people have concerns. They have a message. They have some kind of agenda that they want. I don't use agenda as a bad and a negative there. They have a message that they want to convey. And so John, I'm going to go to the New Testament now, which is out of my field, so you can plug your ears now. But in the Gospel of John, when Jesus is carrying his cross to the Golgotha, and he's carrying it, Matthew, Mark, and Luke have Simon of Cyrene step in and rescue him, right? Gospel of John, not so. Jesus carries it the whole way. And the reason is theological. The reason is Jesus is on his way not to the humiliation of crucifixion. He is headed for coronation. And nobody's going to get in the way. If you read John, the Greeks They want to talk to Jesus? No, we don't have time for you. We've got a coronation. We've got a schedule. We're headed here. And Jesus is going to take it the whole way. So maybe if we pay attention to the sort of theological issues as well as archaeological, we could actually gain, I think, a much more dynamic picture of Scripture, which actually could be quite enriching. Scary, okay, but enriching at the same time. So, okay, I think that's it. Did you have enough? No, we were done. Okay, back to you, Pastor.
So, what do y'all think? You're coming back tomorrow? Absolutely. We have a wonderful lunch planned, and we're going to have 2 meetings in the morning, one at 9:30, and then we'll take a break, and then again at 11, right here. Then we'll go up and around the corner to the Better Living Center, which is our fellowship hall, and we have a nice vegetarian meal planned to share with you. And then we'll be back here for one last meeting tomorrow. If you are not planning to come back, please let me know, because I have some other things I want to share with you that we'll be sharing tomorrow. Greg.
You gonna have cookies?
I did not make cookies. I made other things today.
So people need to know that it will be live streamed and recorded tomorrow, so if they can't be here, they can watch it.
Yes, on our church website, YouTube channel. Yeah. So we will have it if you have other responsibilities tomorrow. Okay? Let's just have a prayer of thank you. Thank you, Lord Jesus, that we do not have to be afraid of juxtaposition, but that you can make us curious and faithful and full of faith at the same time. And thank you for all these amazing ideas that just inspire us to be curious and full of faith. May we go home safely tonight and return again to learn more tomorrow. And please just may there be a blessing and a deeper love of your word, because we've been here together. I ask these things in the name of Jesus. Amen. Okay.